Now, due process is an aspect of tackling corruption, if I understand the concept very well. But there's more to it than that. And this was part of the reforms that you were talking about that you tried to implement under General Obasanjo. How are you going to tackle corruption on becoming president? How do you hope to? Because a lot of people in your position have said, look, when I get there, I want to do this, I want to do. But then no sooner do they get there that it seems as if they are captured by the same system they hope to change. How do you hope to avoid that?
So first, at least, it is clear to you that I was never captured by the system I went into work in for 6.5 years. I was never captured. If there's anything that can be said for me, it is that. I went in there, did the governance reforms that I needed to do. I walked out of there with my head held high, and that I continue to hold my head high because the system could not take me down. So if you asked a question on how do you tackle systemic corruption of the kind that our country suffers? Number one, I have evidence of knowledge behind me. Having been one of the co-founders of Transparency International, we've brought this issue of corruption as a global malady and done a lot of things with countries and institutions globally to try to fix it. So in the process, we've learned quite a lot. And then in my academic research, it's been a focus on what you do in order to reduce corruption, even if you cannot eliminate it. We've looked at country experiences. I've had to implement some of the things that matter when you want to reduce corruption. The public procurement reform was an important part of reducing corruption in this country, because before we got ourselves a public procurement system on the basis of codification into law that you today know as the Bureau for Public Procurement, the work that our team did to fix the public contracting that was chaotic and inefficient. We saw the value for money in the spending pattern of government go from lower levels of 40 kobo for every naira spent to inching towards 70 kobo for every naira spent before I left that responsibility. The work that we did with NEITI, Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, opened up the petroleum sector to global scrutiny and surprised everyone that we could audit, not just audit of the revenues received or revenues said to have been paid by companies, which is the basic EITI at the global level. We went further. We went further, rather. We did process audit that audited how decisions are made in the sector and how procurement is done in the sector, so that we could understand whether they were over-invoicing in joint venture activities, looking at human resources and those kinds of issues of process. How were they optimizing and gaining efficiencies in the deployment of technologies? Process audit, financial audit, and physical audit. What volumes of hydrocarbon do we produce? What do we use domestically? What do we export? Where are the wellheads? What's going on in terms of the technical losses and the and the thefts. Those kinds of reforms are reforms that reduce opportunity for corruption. When you have a multiple of reforms that take on...
They go on simultaneously also.
Simultaneously. They take on those aspects in your economy where there is too much discretionary power being exercised by people in government, and you reformed the way that they are organized. It reduces the opportunity for corruption. And when you reduce opportunity for corruption, what research shows to us, and basic evidence in the way we've seen across country, is that you actually reduce corruption. Because you reduce opportunities, you reduce corruption actually happening. So corruption happening is correlated to the scale of opportunity for it to happen. So those reforms are very important. Take the telecom sector. You remember that it was a very corrupt sector, don't you? Especially on the side of government, because it was one monopoly called Nitel. And there was so much corruption. Corruption in their capex, their capital expenditure, corruption in the delivery of service. You know, you produced like 500,000 telephone lines for many decades after having spent astronomical billions supposedly to invest in the backbone and all the other things for. But what is it that has happened? Do we talk about corruption in Nitel anymore? Do we talk about corruption in the telecom sector? What we probably talk about is the quality of private sector service, right? And because there's competition, they have to continuously improve. Otherwise, they lose business. So simply by deregulating the telecom sector, liberalizing it, and bringing competitive capital into it, it changed the story of that sector. There are many sectors in our country that are waiting for similar bold measures that take away this crippling presence of government and its officials in them, and would transfer the ownership and control and opportunity to make premium out of risks. And it changes a lot of things in terms of opportunity for corruption. Look at the petroleum sector. That's part of the reason that you had how many people contested for the PDP primaries. You think that all that contest was so that they would come and give us some brilliant idea of the fourth industrial revolution, how to be part of the second machine age? No, it's they're waiting for who would next be the president that is also Minister of Petroleum. That era has to go. It must go. We must end it. The petroleum sector must become a competitive sector, a transparent sector, a sector that faces the discipline of the market.
So you would deregulate it?
Oh my goodness. Couldn't just wait to put that sector in the way that it should be. I don't want to be president of NNPC. What's that? That's not what your fellow presidents do with their time. So when we understand that, and we take a sector like aviation, and we ensure that for all of those sectors, that government understands its role. The basic role of government is the role as an enabler. An enabler that knows how to articulate the right policies, sensible policies that govern a sector, has the right kind of laws so that institutional procedures and regulations and rules do not stagnate or stultify the activities of private sector in the sector. And then government that understands how to choose the priorities of investment that would facilitate business to do well, to be more competitive, so that the cost of doing business is not crippling business. It's also not, making it impossible for basic service delivery to be available to the poor and even to the rich, as the case may be. So that when government understands the remit of its role and enables the private sector to thrive, that's the heart of the new direction that I seek to present. We cannot be a country that fluctuates in this volatility of the variabilities of the oil price. The vagaries of the oil price cannot take us down and take us up. You can see that the combined effect has not been anything that is worthy, not worthy for anyone in this country other than the elite class. So that if we have 87 million of our citizens in extreme poverty, if we have 3 to 4 million of our young people graduating one level of study or the other and entering into the labor market, and only 10% of them would find anything called decent jobs, if we have a situation where we have the maternal mortality rate in our country higher than the Africa average, the child mortality and infant mortality rate higher than the Africa average, if we come out as number 142 in the human capital index globally, if we find ourselves in regions of almost non-existent infrastructure in the global index that measures quality of infrastructure, after having earned so much from this oil thing, then we must say to ourselves, it's time to delink oil from our lives. It is time to center our development properly. And to do that is for us to be intelligent government. We need government that is led by people who have the character, the competence, the capacity to see tomorrow.